Annie is a 15-year-old high school girl studying at Kingston College. She is from an impoverished background. At her age, she has to do some dirty jobs to support her parent, who finds it hard to afford some basic needs. Annie's father was a medium-income gardener, but a fire incident and an economic crisis crippled the family's resources. Despite her poor background and physical appearance, Annie has always been a good influence. She has a scar on her face. The spot was an injury sustained during the fire breakout. She was saved from the fire, but the scar on her face is indelible. The family can't afford cosmetic surgery for the spot. In the slum of the city where they lived, Annie would gather fruit nuts from her daddy's farm and give them to beggar immigrants' children, whom she thinks she is better than. She has always been optimistic about life and helps her poor dad in his garden. She is super independent for her age. At 14, she passed the grade exams and was poised to enter college. She applied for scholarships and got lucky with one. A famous firm that offers scholarships to less privileged children picked Annie as one of the kids to be offered admission. The criteria were based on her excellent grades in the elementary STEM exams. It was a day of great joy when she received her scholarship papers to start studying. Annie's father cried when he saw his daughter dressed for high school on the first day. Annie started school and did quite well in both class and extramural activities. The poor students always left with the school bus because of financial constraints, and trekked home when the school bus dropped them at the bus terminal. Annie enjoyed this gesture and never missed the opportunity. One of these days in school, one popular bully took great interest in Annie. Peter approached Annie during recreation and wanted to know her name, age, and where she lived. Annie told him her name and age, but didn't reveal her house address. Peter picked up on this and insulted her for being physically deprived despite her age. He called Annie Scars-Face Jerry. Jerry stands for the famous cartoon character in Tom and Jerry series, while the scar is because of the mark on Annie's face. It was an awful day for Annie. She had never been insulted in such a manner before. She left the scene and started walking away from Peter. The bully, Peter, kept walking alongside her and talking down on her. Bran, one of Annie's schoolmates, saw what had happened. He started coming towards Annie. Peter left when he sighted him. Bran met Annie and tried to inquire what was happening. Annie told him what had happened, but got an unexpected reply. Bran said, "I know you look poor, but to have a scarred face on top of poverty is a nasty combination. I hope you get past the insults." These words were cruel and heavy on little Annie. She got home and cried bitterly. She never complained about these issues to her dad because attending such a prestigious institution was a dream come true for the poor gardener. Peter always had the newest, best, and most expensive everything. He is from a wealthy family, and his parents were significant contributors to the school's social welfare department. Another day in school, he lurked around until he spotted Annie, where she was sitting on the veranda. He walked up to her and bragged about his family's wealth, his newest belt, shoes, and Swiss account for his holidays. He was so mean and kept calling her Scarface Jerry. Annie stood up from where she was sitting and wanted to leave. The bully boy smirked and told her that her family was like an ant on the earth's surface. She could go on and report him to authorities. Still, nobody could do anything because she has no evidence, and her family is his immunity over any bullshit. These words dampened Annie's heart and hope. As a young girl, she has never enjoyed the privileges of a fair society, and she believes that reporting to authorities won't change her situation. In the worst-case scenario, the boy has a crew of friends. They could lie against her, and she could lose her scholarship. As days went by, Peter became increasingly mean and violent. On a cultural day in school, he got a new Mustang and some of the most incredible music, but used this to oppress Annie. It was as if he had a special hatred for her, and would do anything to talk her down, pull down her esteem, and abuse her. One day he insulted Annie so hard that Annie lost her temper and wanted to kick his ass. Immediately she stood to fight. Peter's friends rammed her up and shoved her into a support pole nearby. She screamed in pain, but still Peter laughed while kicking at her. Two of his best friends were accomplices. They joined in the laughter and kicked Annie in the butt, calling her hard rock butts. Annie was determined to report them to the police or authority. Peter brought out a short gun, pointed it below Annie's belt region, and told her that if she ever reported this incident to anyone, he would shoot her in the streets, and nothing would happen. One of his friends also grabbed a short dagger and made the same threats to her. The bully left Annie with bruises that day. At home, the poor Annie became increasingly solitary and always stayed private. Annie's father worried over her sudden change of attitude, but he didn't board her so much. He blamed her unusual calm on puberty and school stress. Peter got more hostile and increasingly dire over the past months went on. After the assaults, he made sure that he threatened her. "Don't tell on me or I will fucking shoot you and your haggard hair. Also, don't tell the authorities because I will know. If I know, I will be marked for danger." Annie's grades in school started to drop. She became increasingly scared of her environment because her tormentor ensured he never let her out of his sight. She was young, had not been exposed, and genuinely believed he would find out and murder her and her father. She stayed silent and tried to avoid him as much as possible. Over the past year, other close cliques of Peter made life unbearable for her. They didn't refer to her with her real name. They nicknamed her Scarface Jerry. This name started affecting Annie's self-esteem, and an increasing number of school students used these derogatory words to her whenever there was a quarrel. She is one of the poorest girls in the school, if not the poorest. Hence, she always stood out both in physical appearance and material wear. One fateful day, the Kingston High School students went for a picnic. A student affair unit organized the breeze, and unfortunately for Annie, Peter was in her group for the excursion. Some school students didn't know how to swim in the pool. Peter can swim very well, but Annie can't. After the break, everyone left the pool and went to the bar. Peter quietly called Annie to come to swim with him. Annie acts as if this bully has defeated her. She obeys almost everything he says to avoid trouble and more bullies. When Annie came closer to him, he told her that he wanted to make amends for all the bad things he had done to her. Annie naively thought her woes were ending and wondered what had changed his heart. Peter offered to teach her how to swim, to say he was sorry for bullying her over the year. Annie followed him to the pool. The other kids had drinks and pizza at the bar. Peter took Annie to the 6-feet-deep pool area and then told her to try not to reach the ground. She was petrified. Peter encouraged her to move her legs and hands in sync. She was afraid but didn't fidget because Peter had been taking her around the water for 10 minutes. Suddenly, Peter went underground and swam far away from Annie. At first, Annie didn't know what was happening, but became scared when Peter shouted "Scarface" from the other end of the water. Annie was on lifeguard, but she was terrified. She almost urinated on her pants. The bully then swam to her again and dragged the lifeguard off of her body this time. Annie started shouting. She was so scared and was drowning when one of the securities noticed something was off. The security woman jumped into the water and saved Annie from drowning. Peter faked as if he was getting soaked, and security kept him. He did this so that Annie wouldn't have allegations against him. It was a sad day for Annie when she thought her woes were about to end. She never knew his erratic behavior could be this tormenting and dangerous. The security guard escorted them out to the pool area and warned them never to enter the deep pool area without supervision. When Annie got home, she wanted to open up to her dad and tell him what has been happening for 1 year and 2 months. She's been going to school. The dad was happy about the picnic she went to, and she didn't want to disrupt his joy. Annie has always been very considerate, but she fears something might happen to her one day. She is also scared that if her dad gets to know what is happening, he will go head on with her bully, and this may get too serious that something dangerous might happen. Annie started getting depressed. The pool incident gave her nightmares, and she couldn't concentrate throughout the week. Day by day, he was making life miserable for her. 2 days after the pool incident, he keenly observed to see if she would report the incident to authorities. She didn't. In the afternoon, everyone went to the playground to play. Annie was absent-minded and walking across the flower area. Suddenly, someone karate kicked her from the side. The kicker turned out to be Peter. Without thinking, Annie caught hold of his ankle one-handed. She cupped it from underneath and held onto it so high that it couldn't go without tipping him over. Peter swung his fist at her but couldn't reach her. He didn't want to kick with the other leg because he knew if he did that, the legs would get outstretched and he would fall over. All he could do was hop and threaten Annie. Annie held his leg without saying a word. He threatened her with all sorts of dire consequences, but Annie didn't say a word. Instead, she stood her ground and held him. Students in that vicinity noticed what was happening and formed a circle around them. The students started laughing and laughing a lot. Everyone was happy because his many threats still fell on deaf ears. One of the teachers got a glimpse of what was happening and came there to separate them. After separating them, the teacher took the two to her office. When they got to the teacher's office, Peter started laying heaps of false testimonies against Annie, accusing her of being a bully who torments other kids in school. The teacher didn't believe these words because they had a report about Peter's erratic behaviors. Annie was sobbing and shedding tears and couldn't bring herself to say all the torment she had received from Peter since she entered the school. After a few minutes of crying, she got solace from the teacher's consolations and finally decided to open up. She told the teacher how Peter tried to drown her the day they went for a picnic, called her Scarface Jerry, and how he and his friends had made her life unbearable for her in school. The teacher was shocked to get these revelations. She hugged Annie and apologized on behalf of the school for negligence. The case was forwarded to the principal of the school. Peter was finally expelled from the school, and his crew of friends was given 2 months of suspensions each. 6 months after this incident, news speculated all over the internet about a boy waving a large handgun at police officers. He had crashed a car into the tree, jumping out yelling profanities, and waved a gun at the police officers that came to arrest him. The police warned him to drop the firearm, but he didn't. He kept threatening and yelling at them. He attempted to pull the trigger, so they shot at his arm and arrested him. He later died in the hospital from a gunshot injury. Annie was happy scared when she got this news. She was happy that her tormentor had met his Waterloo, but was scared because what if the bully had shot her as he attempted to shoot the police? In the following years, Annie graduated with flying colors, got a job with a famous company, and changed her family's socioeconomic status. The family moved out of the slum and rented an apartment not far from the capital. She got corrective plastic surgery on her face. At 29, Annie got her dad a Mercedes-Benz model car. She promised to care for him and make him as comfortable as any good daughter would. The joy was overloaded in this little family.
The first day of spring turned out to be extremely damp and dank. The same gray and boring was the life of a young woman who looked out of the window longingly this early morning. Elizabeth was sitting on the sagging sofa in the tiny kitchen, drinking cold tea and finishing a piece of yesterday's apple pie. Today, she turned 31 years old, and this simple breakfast on the kitchen table was all she could afford at the moment. Before blowing out the candle, she thought about what to wish for and whispered aloud the cherished words, "I want life in our family to get better." The cake seemed tasteless to the birthday girl and the tea tasteless. It used to be different. And it was not at all about the variety of apples or cinnamon. Elizabeth was widowed a year ago. Her husband Steve was knocked down by a pedestrian crossing by some scoundrel when he was returning home from work. It was in the evening, and none of the random passers-by remembered the car's license plate number. Elizabeth found out about the tragedy in the morning when she returned from the night shift. They'd had a happy marriage. The lack of money and eternal debts did not prevent the spouses from sincerely loving each other. They'd been together since high school. The awkward junior in high school named Steve immediately liked a classmate who transferred to the school from another school. For her sake, Steve fell in love with reading books, became interested in classical music, and became interested in sports. Now, it was difficult to recognize Steve because love transformed him. Trying to match his beloved, Steve began to take part in the social life of the school, carefully prepared homework, and stayed up late in the library. But that's not how Steve won Elizabeth's heart. She was always there at a difficult moment, and Elizabeth quickly got used to the fact that she could always rely on him. Unbeknownst to herself, she fell in love with this shy young man who on the day they met could not connect two words. After finishing school, Steve and Elizabeth decided not to break up and entered the same university together. But the trouble is, Steve couldn't keep up his grades and joined the army. Elizabeth was not at all frightened by the difficulties that arose, and she firmly decided to wait for her beloved. The year flew by unnoticed, and when Steve paid his debt to the motherland, he and Elizabeth got married. 9 months later, they had a new baby, who they named Andrew. After a while, Elizabeth was forced to transfer to the correspondence department, and Steve got a job as a handyman at a construction site. At first, everything went like clockwork, and the young family had enough money. They even managed to save money. Everything collapsed in an instant when Steve lost a high-paying job. It turned out that his boss was illegally building a housing complex in the city center. The news that Elizabeth's mother Margaret was seriously ill finally upset their family. Margaret was diagnosed with cancer, and the woman needed an urgent operation. All the savings of their young family went to her treatment and rehabilitation. She even had to sell a house in the village where the family liked to spend weekends. Fortunately, the surgery helped, and Margaret soon went on the mend. But then a new disaster happened, from which their family could not recover. The sudden death of Steve undermined the emotional state of Elizabeth, who did not know how to live on. Together with her husband, confidence in the future finally died in her. Elizabeth held on only for the sake of her son and old mother, who were always there and supported her, and now she was sitting in the kitchen, sipping tea, and thinking about how worthless life is. For many, worthlessness is the lack of money, career, personal life, and so on. But for Elizabeth, worthlessness consisted in a lack of purpose in life. Her aspirations and desires were shattered and broken in a crushing way on the day when she saw her husband's lifeless face. The woman hoped to the last that this was a terrible joke, a stupid medical mistake, and her Steve was actually alive. He will enter the house as before, pick up his son in his arms, and kiss his wife. A single tear rolled down her cheek from the old memories of a once happy life. Now the woman dreamed only of a good life. No, not for herself at all. Andrew and the old mother. That's who Elizabeth was thinking about in the first place. This thought was firmly rooted in her mind a couple of days ago after meeting with a classmate. She met Nancy quite by chance at the supermarket, where she ran in for a minute to get milk and fresh buns with raisins for Andrew. For a moment, she admired the woman who was walking towards her. Her confident, calm gait and the click of her heels made many men turn around. But the woman didn't seem to notice anyone around her. She was concentrating on choosing cheese, fruit, and a jar of caviar, putting the products in her basket. Elizabeth did not immediately recognize the stylishly dressed woman as a mischievous, ungainly girl with whom she sat at the same desk all her school years. No, Nancy was not a universally recognized beauty like Elizabeth, but there was something in her gaze that attracted men like a magnet. Styled hair, scarlet lipstick, expensive perfume, gold jewelry, and the latest iPhone model literally screamed about her solvency. With her manicured fingers, she traced the label on the expensive champagne, intently studying what was written. Then she neatly added the bottle to her purchases. Elizabeth felt embarrassed for her appearance, disheveled hair and dark circles under her eyes. She hurried past so as not to catch Nancy's eye, but accidentally caught the woman with her elbow. "Excuse me." Elizabeth apologized as she walked by, praying to all the gods that Nancy wouldn't recognize her. "It's okay, it happens," Nancy answered mechanically. But after looking closely at the face of a random passerby, she suddenly made a discovery for herself. "Elizabeth? Elizabeth Wilson, it's you. How many years? How many winters? Listen, I'm so glad to see you. Let's sit in a cafe and chat. Oh, only first, to the register. Otherwise, the guard is already looking suspiciously at us," Nancy hastily said in a voice that did not tolerate rejection. Her nimble fingers had already wrapped around Elizabeth's arm, and she was being led to the exit of the supermarket. "Hi, Nancy. You're still the same chatterbox." Elizabeth laughed sincerely for the first time in a long time. After ordering a latte and a tiramisu for two, Nancy talked incessantly about herself and her life. It turned out that she has her own business. She helped wealthy people find good servants who would carefully clean the mansions and keep quiet about what was happening outside their walls. She always liked to talk, and Elizabeth loved to listen. This was the secret of their school friendship. "Yes, that's enough about me. Tell me, how are you doing? Married? Are there any children?" "I was married, and now I'm a widow. An accident a year ago. My husband was hit by a car. Now I live with my mother and son Andrew. He's a smart boy growing up, and he will go to school this year." "God, I'm sorry. I didn't know." Nancy apologized hurriedly, even though she was a giggler, a gossip girl, and even a flirt. But no human emotion was foreign to her. "And are you working?" "No way. Without work experience, they'll only let me clean the floors," Elizabeth replied sharply. Floors. Now that's an idea." Nancy pondered. "Let me help you with the work. I have one customer here, and he urgently needs a maid, and as luck would have it, all the girls are busy." "Well, I don't even know if I can handle it." "Of course you can, because you've been awfully clean since childhood. Besides, he pays a lot of money, and your son is going to school this year, and your mother is old, you said yourself. So think carefully. You will work for a couple of months, and you will run around beauty salons and buy toys for the child." "Well, Nancy, you can even persuade a deaf person." "Okay, I agree," Elizabeth replied, thinking that a good salary would not hurt her in any way. "Believe me, this job will be like a breath of fresh air for you. It's a pleasure to put things in order in such houses. Crystal antiques, expensive paintings are everywhere, and if you try, you'll get some poor guy. Just choose prettier and richer, so you will become a hostess." "What are you saying? After Steve died, I don't even want to look at other men." "That's stupid. You are a young, beautiful woman. You also need to think about yourself, and your son still needs a father. For a boy, the example of a serious and accomplished man is extremely important." "Maybe you're right, but I'm not ready for a relationship yet." "Oh, Lizzie, what would you do without me?" "Well, never mind. We will quickly direct your life for the better. How nice it is to feel like a fairy godmother." "Nancy, but I have no one to leave my son to. Mom hasn't been feeling well lately, and it will be hard for her to sit with him. What to do? Advise me." "I will talk to the customer and explain the whole situation. Perhaps he will allow you to move with your son." "Nan, you're great. I'm so grateful to you," Elizabeth exclaimed happily, feeling that life was beginning to improve. The next few days were agonizing, and waiting was the hardest for the young woman. Not knowing what to do with herself, she was rushing around the apartment like a tiger in a cage. Elizabeth already began to think that there was no meeting, and the sorceress named Nancy she just dreamed. When the phone rang in her apartment a few days later, Elizabeth rushed to the phone. Her whole life depended on the decision at the other end of the wire. "Well, Lizzie, congratulations to you. Now you're officially employed. Pack your things. You and your son are moving into John Clark's country house today, and tomorrow morning you start your direct duties." Thank you, Nancy. From our whole family, thank you. Don't thank me, don't. I should be thanking you. I've been looking for a friend like you, so come on, don't be sour. But get ready as soon as possible. John Clark doesn't like to wait. But Elizabeth didn't hear anything more. She was like a little girl floating in the clouds. Hurriedly packing her things, she circled around the room and hummed. Lizzie, it's quite unexpected to see you in such a mood. Has something happened? Elizabeth's mother asked, sincerely rejoicing for her daughter, who has never smiled since the day her husband died. Mommy dear, life is getting better. I got a job. Oh, I'm so happy for you, my daughter. I finally see you having fun. Trust me, Steve wanted you to be happy again. I loved your late husband like my own son, but he left us, and it was very painful for me to watch you depressed. I'm sorry, Mom. I promise I won't hurt you, Lizzie agreed, realizing that she was bringing pain to her family with prolonged suffering. When a black foreign car picked up Elizabeth and Andrew in the evening, Elizabeth felt like Cinderella, who finally had a chance to go to the royal ball. The country mansion of J. Clark's was like a small medieval castle. A huge park, a small pond, shady alleys, along which it must be so pleasant to walk in good weather, drew Elizabeth's attention. The big gray building in which he and his son were to live did not look creepy and unfriendly at all. The polite and courteous owner of the mansion, a man slightly over 50 years old, was already expecting a new assistant around the house. The former maid could no longer handle her duties for health reasons. After learning that Elizabeth has a child, the man did not mind at all that she moved with her son. Despite his wealth and success in business, he was extremely unhappy. In his youth, he lost the woman he loved, with whom he felt so happy. Envious bridesmaids had slandered him, and the bride believed every word. Pride surged in John's heart, and he did not even try to keep his beloved. Years passed, and success and fame quickly came to him, but real, sincere love no longer knocked on his door. He got married twice, but all in vain. None of his wives could give him a long-awaited heir to whom he could transfer all his affairs. Disappointed in women, he plunged headfirst into work, and when he woke up, he realized that he had wasted my best years. He had houses, apartments, bank accounts, but did not have the most important thing, a big, strong, and loving family, which he dreamed of so much. Lizzie and her son immediately took root in his house. Children's laughter, the patter of Andrew's little feet, and Elizabeth's friendly smile filled the old mansion with light and warmth. Elizabeth cooked well and spoiled everyone with fragrant pastries on weekends. In his spare time, John was happy to tinker with the boy, imagining himself as a caring grandfather. He told him interesting stories about his travels, built a toy railway, and even performed the role of a horse, riding a little prankster on his back. From the outside, they looked like a real family. Yes, but it was impossible. Elizabeth's mother always said that her father was a pilot and crashed during an exercise. But one incident made Elizabeth doubt the truthfulness of her mother's words. One day, while cleaning the office, Elizabeth found her childhood photo on the desk. There could be no mistake. The card depicted a girl with an upturned freckled nose and dressed in a pretty canary-colored dress. But why is her picture here? Thinking about it, she got all worked up. Talking about his youth, John Clark mentioned a lover named Margaret, with whom he was divorced by a villainous fate. Was that woman her mother, and Lizzie his daughter? Thoughts did not give her rest, and then Elizabeth decided to invite her mother to the mansion, citing the fact that Andrew missed his beloved grandmother. The very next day, Margaret appeared in the house. At that moment, she still had no idea what kind of surprise fate would give her. Mommy, tell me the whole truth. Who is my father, and did he die? Lizzie, why such questions? I've told you 100 times that he was a pilot. But then what is my photo doing in John Clark's office? I see you've turned pale. You know that name, don't you? What did you have in common? Is he really my father? Daughter, calm down. Since you know everything, I'll tell you the truth. We really were a wonderful couple once. But after he cheated on me, our wedding didn't take place. I left him and then realized that I was pregnant. Out of anger, I wanted to get rid of the child, but at the last moment I changed my mind. Yes, Lizzie, he's your real father and Andrew's grandfather, but he is a terrible person, and it's better that you never see each other again. Mom, I just found my father and you want to deprive me of him? Elizabeth said angrily. How could you hide the truth from me? He wasn't cheating on you at all. It's just that your girlfriends were jealous of your happiness, so they made it up, and you believed it. Fate itself brought us together. Actually, it's not fate. A man's voice came from behind. A year ago, I found out that my ex-lover secretly gave birth to a child from me. I've been looking for you all this time, Lizzie. And believe me, our meeting is not accidental. I am incredibly proud to have such a wonderful daughter and grandson. And you, Margot, forgive me. I was really loyal to you. I was young, stupid, and did not appreciate his happiness. Years have passed, but I still love you. Maybe we still have a chance for happiness. We may not be young anymore, but we have many wonderful moments ahead of us. Darling, how stupid we were. I also love you more than life, Margaret replied, snuggling up to his sturdy shoulder. That's how fate gave two lovers a chance to be happy again. And Elizabeth has learned a simple truth for herself. There is no need to be afraid to love and to be loved. Love does not tolerate timidity. After all, tomorrow may never come. And she also knew for sure that Steve was looking at her from heaven and blessing her to try to be happy again.
Daisy was passionate about sewing another dress on a sewing machine. She loved sewing and making new clothes for people. Her favorite work allowed her to temporarily forget her poor existence, her father's illness, and that the world was unfair to her. Daisy was trying to spend more time at work because she was not happy at home. Her mother had already died, and her father was very ill. But most of all, the girl was frightened and upset by her older brother Harry. He didn't work anywhere, only drank, and waited for Daisy to bring the money. Her sick father could not influence his son, and the girl was too weak to stand up to her older brother. Daisy was afraid to move out of the house because her father would be left unattended. She also feared her brother's revenge. Harry took most of the girl's money, so she couldn't save up. But Daisy wasn't depressed. She worked hard, just like her mother taught her. Chief fashion designer, Mr. Atman, noted Daisy's diligence and passion for the profession. She was no longer to sew, but to paint new models, offer ideas, and help choose fabrics and accessories. Daisy was proud of her new position at 22. She would very much like to share the joy with her mother. Her mother taught her to sew and instilled a love for modeling and sewing clothes. But her mother died and did not see how intelligent and beautiful her daughter had grown up. Before Daisy climbed the career ladder, she worked as a seamstress with her friend Angela. When Mr. Atman announced that Daisy would now assist him with his new collection, there was no limit to the girl's happiness. Daisy immediately shared with Angela the glad tidings, but for some reason, her friend did not support her and said, "Mr. Atman made you his assistant too quickly. I've been working here longer than you. Angela, I'd like to get your job, but it's not up to me." So Daisy started making excuses. Angela relented and asked to see Daisy's sketches for Mr. Atman. "What beautiful dresses," said Angela. "You have natural talent." Mr. Atman made the right choice. "Your models look fresh and original." "Well done." Angela looked closely at every sketch of the dress. Daisy was embarrassed by the praise. She was delighted that her friend no longer resented her. The next day, Daisy came to work on her album. She wore a dress that she made herself. It was her favorite dress. It emphasized her beautiful figure, and more importantly, it gave a lovely mood. All night, Daisy drew sketches for Mr. Atman's collection. Daisy knocked and entered the head designer's office. She saw not only Mr. Atman, but Angela in the office room. She had a sketchbook in her hand. Daisy saw it and stopped. Angela's drawings were very similar to Daisy's. Her friend just stole her ideas and pretended to be hers. "Look, Daisy, Angela's ideas are so authentic. How will you please me?" Mr. Atman addressed her. Daisy was very disappointed with her friend's betrayal and could not open her file. She could barely untie the clasps on the cheap cardboard folder. Mr. Atman picked up the sheets, frowned, and began comparing them with Angela's sketches. "She stole my ideas," Angela screamed. "I didn't expect you to do that." But Daisy couldn't say a word. Not only did Angela steal her ideas, but she accused Daisy of stealing. No doubt Daisy's drawings are more expressive, but I don't need artistic skills, I need original ideas, said Mr. Atmont. Daisy was silent. That's terrible, Daisy, said Mr. Atmont. It's the thieving that angers me the most, especially when people steal ideas. All of Mr. Atmont's image was distressing because he liked Daisy for her hard work. You can't expect anything good from her, said Angela. Her family is poor and her brother is a thief. Tears poured out of Daisy's eyes. The girl ran out of the office, not understanding where she was going because of the veil of tears. Daisy couldn't keep working for Mr. Atmont. She was ashamed, though she wasn't the thief. Daisy was on her way home, thinking how she would tell her father and brother that she had lost her job. So cruelly, she thought, maybe she should have stayed and worked as a seamstress. But no, Daisy couldn't stay because she was wrongly accused of stealing. With every step, Daisy made it harder to come home. Finally, she arrived. The doors were open. It scared Daisy. The girl gently entered the house. In the kitchen, the older brother was sitting and drinking alcohol. Daisy! Hello. When will you bring the money? Harry asked. Daisy didn't answer anything and went back to the room where her father used to sit. But her father wasn't there. Daisy went back to the kitchen and asked, Where's Dad, Harry? Oh, our old man must be dead. The doctors took him. He was wheezing a long time. I didn't have time for him, said Harry on the whiskey glass. The booze won't wait. Daisy's legs hurt. She wanted to hit her brother with hate, but he was much stronger than her. Her brother could have beaten her if she'd just scolded him. I'm going to my dad's, Daisy said. Whatever you want, dear sister, but it would have been nice to have some money first for your beloved brother. Daisy ran out of the house. She had little money in her purse, quit her job, and now she was thinking about how to get to the hospital. Daisy stood by the road in despair and looked for passing cars. A car stopped. A young man was sitting in the car. He lowered the window of the vehicle and asked loudly, Excuse me, am I on the right way to the hospital? Daisy's heart was racing. Yes, you're going right. Suddenly, she decided to ask for help and said, I have to go there, too, urgently. Could you give me a lift? Of course, I'd be happy to help, said the lad. I have very little money, said Daisy. Don't worry, girl. You show me the way and that'll be enough, said the lad. My name's Mick. I'm Daisy, said the girl, and got into the car. The guy turned out to be friendly. He said he would visit his uncle. The guy noticed that Daisy was sorrowful. Mick asked the girl what was wrong with her. Daisy suddenly told him about her friend's betrayal, her dismissal, and her father's illness. You know, Daisy, I had a rough patch too. I was blind once. We looked for reasons but couldn't find any. I gave myself my word that I would one day see again. One day, after a relentless search and endless visits, the doctors gave its result, and I began to see again. Cool. You're a strong man, said Daisy. Thank you. I was making a point, and it wasn't for nothing, because today I figured out why I got my sight back, to see a beautiful girl like you. Daisy was embarrassed by the guy's words and didn't know what to say. What do you dream of? Mick asked. I dream that one day I will create my collection. These will be dresses in which girls and women will bloom like flowers. It's a wonderful dream, said Mick. Believe in yourself. My aunt runs the atelier, of course, not as big as Mr. Atmont's agency. I didn't know, said Daisy. She felt ashamed for telling a guy her problems she didn't know, and grateful for the sympathy at the same time. When the young people got out of the car, Mick gave Daisy a card with her aunt's contacts and urged her to call. Their paths diverged. Daisy needed to find her father. She saw how bad he looked when she entered her father's room. The old man did not immediately hear that Daisy had come in. The girl gently touched her father's hand, and her father opened his eyes. Hello, Daisy. Hello, my flower, said her father. His voice was feeble. Dad, how are you feeling? Daisy asked. I'm sick, and keeping you from your work. Daisy, you must go to work." Daisy could not say that she had quit. She knew the truth could have killed her father. She could not have disturbed him at that time. "Dad, you'll be fine," said Daisy. The doctor's conversation was disappointing. Father needed expensive treatment, and she had no money. Daisy was very sorry for letting her older brother take the money. They'd have gotten a lot of money if it weren't for Harry. But alas, the family did not have any savings. Daisy promised the doctor that she would bring the necessary amount, although she did not know how she would do it. Daisy walked home on foot because she had no money for a taxi. She had nowhere to go. Despite her sad mood, Daisy noticed the beauty of nature. She was mentally trying to dress on women who walked past her. Did Daisy think about her mom? What would she say to her? Would she understand if Daisy gave up her dreams? The girl decided to go to Mick's aunt's studio. The next day, Daisy came to Mr. Morris's studio. Being terrified at first, she stepped into the building. At Morrison's atelier, things were not the same as at Atmund's. Instead of fuss and creative colors, there was an atmosphere of comfort and tranquility. No one was shouting at the seamstress or throwing sketches, as Mr. Atmund sometimes did. This should be Mr. Morrison, the girl understood. "Hello, Daisy," said. "I was told I came to see you. If you had a job as a seamstress, I have some experience." "Hello," said Mrs. Morrison. "We have a job. Where did you work before?" "At Mr. Atmund's," said Daisy. "Oh, so you're the Daisy fashion designer who stole other people's ideas," said the owner. All the employees of the shop immediately looked at Daisy with curiosity. "Mr. Atmund strongly advised me not to hire you," continued Mrs. Morrison. Daisy's heart seemed to stop. She wanted to run away, but her feet were stuck to the floor. She thought she was ashamed. She was bitter that Mr. Atmund made sure she didn't have a job. How could she prove it? Mr. Atmund knows more about fabrics than humans. Can a lovely lady steal ideas? That's ridiculous. Let Mr. Atmund give recommendations to whoever he wants, but I'll hire you. Daisy thought for a moment she heard wrong. Mrs. Morrison was hiring her? Daisy's joy was endless, and she waited to breathe because she was believed. "I'll take anything," said Daisy. Tears of gratitude made themselves felt. "Thank you." "You'll thank me later," said Mrs. Morrison, "while I give you some simple assignments, because I need to see you in action." Daisy took up her job with enthusiasm. She did her favorite thing again. Even when performing simple orders, she sometimes allowed herself to advise on selecting fabric and how to change the cut so that the dress or suit fit better. Mrs. Morrison was surprisingly receptive to information, not arguing. The payment for her father's treatment was near, and she had not yet earned any money. Daisy went to the bank but was turned down. She didn't dare ask for a loan, and who would she ask? By the end of the week, Mrs. Morrison called Daisy. "Daisy, look, this is my best client. She urgently needs a dress for her nephew's christening. I decided to give you the order, okay?" "Of course, I'll do my best," said Daisy. It was the first full-scale order at that studio. Daisy tried her best, and the dress turned out fantastic. It was as strict as possible, but it did not hide the woman's beauty. The client was so pleased that she paid generously for the order and added a few tips. Mrs. Morrison gave all the money to Daisy, saying, "Daisy, you've earned that money. I'm proud of you and myself for not playing along with Mr. Atmund." Daisy was happy because she now had the money to pay for some of her father's treatment. She was afraid to go home with her money because her older brother was there and could have taken the cash. Daisy went straight to the hospital after work. There she met Mick by chance. "What a pleasure to see you again, Daisy," said the lad. "Nice to see you too," said Daisy. "Thank you." "Why?" Mick was surprised. "You gave me Mrs. Morrison's card, and now I work for her," said Daisy. "Oh, so you're the intelligent, beautiful, extraordinarily talented girl my aunt tells me about every day," Daisy blushed. She didn't know Mrs. Morrison spoke so highly of her. "Well, I'm happy you're working for my aunt, but don't forget one thing," said Mick. "What?" Daisy asked. "Don't forget your dream of a collection. I'd like to see it," said the lad. Daisy felt that she had forgotten her dream. Daisy worked hard. Her father was on the mend. As time passed, Daisy suggested to Mrs. Morrison that she create her collection of dresses. The girl showed sketches that greatly inspired the owner of the studio. In a short time, the Violet Group was created and created a furor in the fashion world. Daisy not only entered the fashion world, but also proved to everyone that she did not steal ideas. Time puts everything in its place. Applying the standard sentence, "born from a humble background," is an understatement in the case of Toby, as he grew up from the specks of dirt in the gutter. The latter sentence describes better the kind of rough childhood he had. Toby, unlike other kids, wore the adulthood mantle at his tender age, as he was more empathetic and intelligent than brilliant. Although his parents were stinking poor, many times he had to skip classes to survive, as he engaged in a loud number of menial jobs. Often, these job sessions clashed with school hours, leaving him no choice but to skip school activities, since the school wasn't paying him, but rather taking from the little he was making, as there was always a new book or reading materials to buy. Toby is the first male and the third child with 2 younger siblings who are boys. In other words, he is the third among 5 children of his parents and the first son. Do you know what this formation implies? He has to commit more as the first son because he has a great responsibility on his shoulders. He might have decided to care less since he was just a teenager. Still, due to Toby's personality, he sees himself as more than his age, as he believes his position in his family makes him the second man after his father. Hence, he's saddled with the duty of providing for their basic needs, just like his father. He feels terrible when his elder sisters and younger brothers, who are always impatient, lament their parents' financial incapability and instability. He was the only one amongst them who understood the parents and believed that all fingers, although rooted in a particular hand, are not equal. The other siblings blame their parents at every opportunity they get for not being rich and financially committed like their mates. On several occasions, they had compared their father with the neighbor in the next house, Mr. Tadden, a business owner with his firm, and was assured to be living just as fine as he had a fleet of luxurious cars in his compound. It is wrong to play the compare and contrast game on Daddy. He's not lazy, and he's trying his best, was Toby's frequent defense line, but they often attacked his statement by uniformly echoing, his trying is never enough. The humiliation of his father from the children, Toby's siblings, and several other reasons, coupled together, made Toby engage in petty jobs that made him pay wages, and the majority of his earnings he spends on his siblings, which went on for years. Toby's love for tech and programming made him decide to learn the skill professionally, immediately after high school. He had gathered some funds to sign up. He was prepared. He saved up for 4 years from his street jobs and often kept the money in a secret hole known to him only. This weird method was applied after he was taught an unforgettable lesson. Do you care to know what happens before the whole saving procedure? Formerly, he used to keep his money carelessly. Maybe it was not careless, but keeping his money in a purse hanging around somewhere in his room was a bad idea in a house where his devouring siblings were living too. They often take his money, and no one ever takes responsibility for the theft. He decided to change his bank and started keeping his money in the ceiling. The outcome wasn't successful too, because this time, the money wasn't stolen, but eaten by rats. These previous experiences made him dig a secret hole, which turned out productive, as his hungry siblings never found out about the spot, and even the rats couldn't prevail. He overcame his adversaries. Toby later married Maria. They had 3 kids together and were all boys. He was living a mediocre life, but that's not what he envisioned. He wanted more from life as he didn't want to endure his father's humiliation. On a fateful day, he concluded to move to the city in search of greener pastures, having convinced his wife that for them to live the lives they dream about and to give their kids the best care, he had to go to the city to further his programming learning. The wife, naturally, disagreed, but since it was for a better life, she couldn't insist further. Toby promised to visit home at least once a month to see the wife and the kids, as they were still very young. The eldest was just 5 years old, the other 3, while the youngest was around a year senior. The city was in a different state entirely, but Toby kept to his words and visited just as they had agreed. He needed to raise some capital to build his own company when he was done learning. He had to work extra hours in the city. At some point, he became a freelancer for top-notch companies, earning well. He was able to raise something tangible. He developed and launched his first software. Things began to change positively, as he demanded the relocation of his wife and kids. After a few years, his company has kept a sound track and record. It topped as the best programming company in the city, attracting wealthy angel investors. This made Toby's company well known, with several branches across the country. In no time, Toby had become very wealthy and lived the life he had wished for with his wife. He overcame his greatest fear as he gave his children all the care and attention he didn't enjoy as a kid. He sent them to the best school in the city, paid their allowances before due time, and practically did everything a father was supposed to do for his kids. When it was time for them to start working, he established them in their individual choices of a business. He eventually became a billionaire after his company expanded to the entire continent and broke out of it. He now has a company in 53 countries. Toby became a well-respected man in his country, and his biographies were taught in schools to motivate kids that there is no limit to what they can achieve, irrespective of where they are coming from, as Toby is a living testimony. Even though Toby is successful in his niche, he never forced his business on any kids. He didn't impose his choice on them, but instead respected their decisions and gave them his full support. After about 30 years of recognition, Toby's boys had grown up and had established themselves with financial and psychological support from their father. The eldest son was an auto dealer, the second son was into real estate, and the youngest ran a successful restaurant. Everything was smooth until the unexpected happened. Toby was diagnosed with cancer and discovered he had just a few months to live. He felt terrible for himself, but worried more about his legacy when he was gone, his company. He has not had time to checkmate the boys as they grew up in wealth. Reminiscing on his memories as a lad, he concluded that his father's humiliation was purposefully because he was poor. The thought torments him by the day, and each time he thinks, a question pops up in his head. If his sons were born as poor, would they still regard and respect him, or humiliate him as his siblings did to his father? He decided to test the kids before he died. He didn't tell them about his newly discovered health situation, not even his wife. He decided to run a setback test on the boys to know if they would still love him regardless. He openly declared his company was going bankrupt due to some money he had borrowed to boost his company some years back, of which the interest had grown massively beyond his ability, so that he would be losing the company to debt. He explained to his sons that he had also mortgaged his house and was to lose his homes too. He told them he had to sell his cars to cover the remaining debt. Hence, he had no property or possessions left. He carried his board members along that all was a stunt, and he was doing it to get some fundamental rights. But they should cooperate with him and keep the truth away from the public. When it's time to unwrap the truth, he would do just that. It was challenging to convince the investors, as they complained that such a prank was deadly and would affect their heritage. But afterwards, they agreed to cooperate as long as he promised them that the stunt wouldn't last too long. His sons didn't believe in hearing it at press stations until they confronted their father and he confirmed it as accurate. They were disappointed their father didn't tell them about it, and they had to find out most embarrassingly. They left their father in anger. After a week, Toby went viral as people had different things to say about the shocking news. Some emphasized with him for his massive loss, while others abused him for taking such a stupid step, as they thought he was an intelligent businessman. He sooner appeared in his sons' respective companies, starting with the eldest to know what they still felt about him, to see if they were worthy of managing his wealth when he eventually died. He appeared like a retard searching for a job in their distinct companies, as he claimed he was now homeless. They sent him away, as they claimed he didn't involve them when he got the exorbitant loan, and rarely included him in his business when it was ranking. Thus, he shouldn't bother them, as, unlike him, they are still respectable people. The youngest son, however, was disappointed that his father didn't include them earlier until he lost all, forgave him, and listened to him. He offered him a soothing job for an older man, and if he needed to learn a new skill, he would pay for the course and grant him the capital to start over once he was done learning. He will also provide him with a new house and car to drive around. He ordered that his staff serve him honorably daily and offer him whatever he asked for. He later took him home to freshen him up and change his clothes, as he looked so unkempt and rough. On the second day, Toby summoned his 3 sons for a family meeting. The eldest and second son refused to attend, as they were still cross at him. They claimed to be busy, but they gave a second thought to hearing the venue. The meeting was held in Toby's private guest house, his most luxurious house. The sons were surprised because that was one of the houses he claimed to have lost. Toby started by revealing his newly detected ailment. Then he told them he didn't lose any of his property, as he had only put them on a test to know whom amongst them genuinely cares about him and is capable of preserving his legacy when he's gone. Still, only their little brother had proven to be the qualified one by passing his little test. For that reason, even though he has forgiven the other 2, as they will remain his sons, 80% of his property shall be willed to their little brother, including his great company. In comparison, the brothers will share the remaining 20%. The brothers sobbed bitterly and asked for their father's forgiveness. After 2 weeks, Toby passed away, and his lawyer to his sons allocated his property as he demanded. The moral lesson of this story is that there's no limit to what you can attain and where you can reach, regardless of your past account or background. However, while money is good, we shouldn't love people just for their money, no matter who they are to us. A relationship is unhealthy if it's based just on money. Similarly, respect shouldn't be quantified by how much wealth someone amasses or possesses. Furthermore, it's not ideal for forsaking a friend or family during troubles or setbacks. No condition is permanent, they say, good or bad, because life is full of ups and downs. When a family or friend falls, it's our utmost responsibility to be the shoulder they can lean on by helping in whatever way we can. In some situations, money might not be the solution. They could all need words of encouragement or physical presence to get back on their feet. So when someone falls, don't make fun of their situation or detach. Instead, help them rise again. That's what a family or friend should be about. Conclusively, getting crossed at someone for not doing the needful at the right time is okay, like in the case of Toby. He didn't carry his family along on time. But then your anger shouldn't overshadow the bond and relationship you have built with someone over the years. Learn to forgive soon, just like the youngest child did. Don't hold up to someone's flaws for long, as no man is perfect. Be the reason why someone who is sad smiles again. Be the reason why someone who has fallen rises again. Be more of a strength than a weakness.
It was almost 3 p.m. The sun glared over the pier, and as the car pulled up, the tension swiftly began to rise. "You don't have the money, you get out of my car," yelled the driver angrily. This was the 3rd or 4th time he had dealt with this particular client, and he had reached a breaking point. A distressed but masculine voice could be heard from the back seat of the car. He desperately tried to explain to Pablo why he should still be helped. "Pablo, I swear, I will find some way to pay you back when we get there. Please, don't abandon me now, especially when we've already gotten this far. The end is in sight." Unfortunately, though, Pablo was already beyond the point of reasoning. Enough was enough. The passenger, Felipe, didn't have any money, so Pablo would do what he has always done with fare-dodging passengers for the past 15 years of his career. Kick them out wasn't remotely his responsibility. Pablo had kindly gotten him through the border and had also previously offered aid to Felipe and his family. Now it was time to cut ties loose. Felipe and his family, his wife Camila and their son Samuel stared blankly as Felipe drove off and accelerated long into the distance. They were now on American soil, but they owed Pablo $10,000, so they would have to continue the journey alone. The beach was lovely and picturesque, but fairly brisk due to the time of the year. Samuel started to get increasingly cold, so Camila wrapped him warm and positioned his wheelchair in a way that angled the warmer sea breeze toward him in an attempt to combat the cold. Talking to himself, he mumbled some thoughts. He didn't even realize that he was saying them aloud. I didn't like the idea from the beginning. If I'm honest, we should have tried to find a cure for him back in our own country. Sure would have saved a pile of money. Unfortunately for Felipe, Camila had heard his mumbling and wasn't particularly pleased about it. Contentiously, she reminded him for the 50th time that they had already tried the doctors back in Afghanistan. They were great and very kind, but didn't have the necessary facilities or treatments. However, they had heard that these treatments were readily available in America, which is why they had invested so much in going there. The sheer audacity of Felipe to brush this off and complain about the chance of their son recovering was out of order. Felipe, to nobody's surprise, was depressed about this and quickly retaliated. The cracks in their relationship promptly started to deepen due to the stresses of Samuel's illness. "And look where we are now. We have no money and are stranded with our..." Raging, Felipe kicked Samuel's wheelchair, which caused it to jolt him forward, causing immense pain. Camila, much like Pablo earlier, had reached a breaking point. She understood his anger and shared the sentiment in many ways. But taking this built-up rage out on their son, who was already suffering enough, no way in hell she would let that slide. A fight began to erupt, and sensing this tension, Samuel tried his best to calm his mother down. "Don't answer him, Mom. Just leave it." "But he hurt you, and I need to teach him a lesson. Nobody hurts my son." "Mom, listen to me for once, for crying out loud. Mom, listen. I hate it. I hate it when you two fight. It makes me feel even worse. So just stop." The next few days were tense. Felipe did his best to put aside the previous anger to find a place for the family to stay. After a few weeks, Felipe just about manages to get enough money to rent out a small room/attic in a nearby town. Settling in was proving difficult, but it would have to work somehow. To try and be comfortable, Samuel lies down on some cardboard and sits with his mum, staring blankly at the rotting ceiling. Felipe would have customarily joined in with this, but his anger was still circulating within him. "You never failed to keep my spirits up, but I think it would be best if I meet my end. We have tried everything feasibly possible, and continuing this endeavor is tearing you and Dad apart. I don't want to be remembered as the cause of your divorce, not after 22 years of happy marriage before I came along and ruined it when I was born." "Don't you dare say that again. This is a country of peace and prosperity. There's no corruption, and very kind-hearted and good people live here. The medicine, doctors, everything. I am 110% sure that we will find help for you. When have we ever let you down?" Deep down, she didn't want him to answer that, and meant it to be rhetorical. Camila and Felipe had let Samuel down so often that it was hard to keep count these days. Before he could reply, Felipe interjected, infuriated by Samuel's comments. He never wanted to hear this again. He was determined not to give up. He had gotten into debt and traveled half across the world for nothing. He loved his son and would do anything for him. "Stop feeding him these lies, Camila. He's a grown-up already and understands the situation as clearly as day. We are both in the wrong. And as much as I hate to admit I am wrong, our son's life is at stake. Let's be realistic and sort this out, okay? You're a good father, Felipe. We all know that. We are a strong family, just cracked and in need of repair. I think Samuel's recovery is the perfect repair. Please, don't give up. We are close to our goal. Another long time passed, and they had finally reached a doctor's surgery. There was hope, at last, that Samuel would get better. The doctor and Camila talk for a while, but forget that Samuel is in the room. He overhears, and it upsets him because they speak depressingly. I understand your situation. We can make some discounts for you, but you have no insurance. I have already slashed the cost of the treatment in half, but I don't know if it will be enough. $200 is the absolute best I can do. I'm doing the best that I can to help. Can I please see your documents? Camila began to cry. I don't have any documents. The doctor looks and sighs. Look, I've been as upfront as possible with you. Maybe come back when you have located your documents. Little did he realize that they would have to travel hundreds of miles to find them. Camila continued to cry. Her luck had honestly run out. Mom, don't cry. We shouldn't have come here. I will die here anyway. Now we have no money, no family at all. It's all because of me. Dad was right after all. It was a rainy and bitter New Year's Eve. The night sky was starless and dim, which wasn't typical for the area. After making a stop at a local gas station, Pablo was on a drive when he pulled into a hotel to pick up a predetermined passenger. No name was given, just the address and the time. In all the years that Pablo had been cabbing, this had never happened before, and it was very suspicious to him. A silhouette got into the car, and Pablo began to drive. A faint but familiar voice pierced through Pablo's soul. He had never expected to hear this voice again. You killed my son. He looked around. It was Felipe in the back of the taxi. His face was crumpled but tense. You bastard. You kicked us out of the taxi at the border. We had no chance but to seek out the closest doctor, and he couldn't save him. If you had driven us a bit further, my boy would be here today. Pablo was equally angry. He had no intention of killing Samuel and was upset by the news. Unfortunately, Felipe was too far gone to acknowledge this or care. He had it in his head that Pablo had killed him, and now the $10,000 he owed him was the least of his problems. Felipe wasn't necessarily known for being violent, but he could do all sorts when he was pushed. He had known Pablo for over a decade and considered him a dear friend. A dear friend of the past, though. He could not forgive him for what he had done and could not live with himself if he let Pablo live. You killed my son, and now he's gone. My life is dead and my wife has left me. Even if she blames you, our revenge was the last thing we agreed on. You will never see that $10,000 we owe you. You will never see the light of day again. End of the road, Pablo. Wasn't friendly knowing you.